Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Politically Depressed. As always, I'm your host, Eamon McAdam. Today, we're joined by a very special guest, Peggy, who was a member of the Palestine Film Club that I was running for a few months last year. And a lot of the things that she would bring into the conversations, I just found so brilliant and full of wisdom and nourishing in a way that I think is always just really needed in this moment of fascism and collapse and catastrophes. So we're going to sit and talk about the current moment, practices, and I don't know, just sort of take it from the present moment. And it's going to be a pretty fluid conversation, but I'm sure it's going to be great. If it's anything like any of the other conversations that Peggy's been a part of at the film club. Before we begin the episode, though, I'd like to remind everybody that this podcast is supported by the From the Periphery Media Collective. And if you like the work I do, and if you like this podcast, please consider becoming a member of the Patreon. There will be links in the description below. But if you don't want to become a monthly member, there's always the tip jar. And again, that link will go in the, what's it called? It'll be a one-time donation type of thing. Anyway, hate doing the self-promo, but it's necessary because I like doing this and I want to keep doing this. So yeah, that's that. Peggy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for inviting me, Eamon. I always enjoy talking with you, and I so appreciate the work that you and your collective are doing. Let's see. So I first, yeah, came across the Palestinian Film Club. I thought it was a really great idea because I love films, and I was really wanting to. I was already involved in the Palestine movement, but I was really wanting to kind of deepen my cultural awareness and cultural connection. I'm Korean. I was born in Korea, but raised in Hawaii and the United States, different parts of Turtle Island. And I live in Hawaii now. Um, and so Palestine is literally on the other side of the world, but I've always felt a connection and wanting to learn more. And I'm a mother and grandmother. I'm 61 years old. I am an Iyengar yoga teacher by trade. That's what I do. And a lot of what my thoughts and the way I live are shaped by my yoga practice. I try to keep it real, not a commercial practice for profit, but really walking the path whatever way I can and incorporating that framework into my actions. Um, and I guess I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, that sounds like enough as an introduction. But so I guess the first question, and this has become a bit of like a typical way that I conduct these interviews on Politically Depressed, because I think it's a question that a lot of people have a very hard time answering, especially because it's small talk, and usually people don't expect you to go so deep. But I think there is a depth to the question, and so I'll ask you, how are you?
When people ask me that question, I've been saying the world is fucked, but I'm managing. I'm doing okay. And so, uh, you know, um, there's just I feel the brutality. I'm a person who chooses to feel and to pay attention, to stay awake. And so I think any of us who really choose to pay attention, we feel the brutality, we feel the suffering, we are suffering. I mean, I'm not going to say that my suffering is equal to that of the Palestinians or other people in the world experiencing similar conditions, but but we can feel what's going on. It's kind of like the way I would put it is like if I pay attention to my body and my body is a microcosm for the planet that we can feel certain places in our bodies that are overheated or tight or constricted or feel blocked or those kinds of areas. And so right now I would say like a hot spot in my microcosm as macrocosm is Palestine and so yeah, it's just like it's a violence, it's a brutality that I kind of hold and wrestle with every day. And I spend a lot of time in prayer, to tell you the truth. And, I spend a lot of time in ritual. Um, but I also experience a lot of joy. My three grandchildren are 2, 5, and 7. I mean, it's so much joy. And I see the world through their eyes. And that gives me constant fuel, energy, motivation, inspiration. How are you doing, Emma?
Oh, no one's ever turned that around, actually. Um, I think listeners to the podcast probably know because I do share it quite often, but I think lately I have been very, very numb. And it's a lot that's become a bit too much. Uh, there was an attempt at, I mean, obviously because I come from Lebanon, and so like the aggression is very much so at home, but also just very close to Palestine, and a lot of my friends are Palestinian, and so and obviously I do all this work, so I'm very connected, and um, I think after the ceasefire in Lebanon, uh, I feel like I broke a little bit, and it's been hard to repair. And I think it's very hard to repair while the pain is still ongoing, which I think is part of the tactic. Because, there was the ceasefire, but they violate it every single day. And oftentimes I call my mother, not just to check up on her, to talk to her, and I can hear there's the drone. There's like just a buzzing of a drone of her head. So it's like very, and so there's definitely like a defense mechanism of numbness that I'm experiencing that I'm trying to fight against. But also there's a thing of like working despite the numbness. So like I'm still doing this, I'm still trying to clock in emotionally, but I'm not letting the numbness affect my engagement. Um,
Wow.
we have a phrase in Arabic, one of my favorites that I've come to learn very familiarly. So like one answer, it's very common. It sounds so melodramatic, but like Arabs are very melodramatic, which is if someone were to ask, how are you? You'd say Aishin, like we're living,
Mm.
which is kind of deep, where it's like at least we're alive and it's fine, like knock on wood.
Yeah.
But then there's another one which is Aishin min illat al-maut, um, which is like we're alive because of the lack of death,
Oh, wow.
which is deep. But again, it's melodramatic in that way where it's like, yeah. And so it's kind of like that. Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask, uh, because the concept of sumud is
Mm.
coming up a lot in popular discourse, popular political discourse. How does the concept or practice of sumud um, compare to numbness? Because I feel like numbing out is a normal human response to trauma, and sometimes it's necessary. Um, and but anyway, yeah, I'm curious your thoughts about that.
That's really interesting. I've never thought of it. And I guess that is actually quite related because it's sort of like a necessary thing to be able to continue going on. Like there's a numbness so that I can continue to resist in my own ways or to do my cultural and media stuff that feels a bit like engaging.
Mhm.
Um, I have to say it's a bit difficult because I think there's certain discourses that it's so hard to describe, but like there's a parallel word to sumud, steadfastness, which is resilience. And
Uh-huh.
resilience became a word that I hated with a
Yeah,
passion
yeah.
because of how much it was like it's used in Lebanon a lot, the resilient people, and
Uh-huh.
I became very bitter towards it, where it was a
Yeah,
kind of like, and there's some people like this where it's like, no, fuck you, we're broken. And
yeah,
there's like there's almost like a toxic positivity, like a
yeah.
You know what I mean?
I lived in Detroit for 9 years, right before I came back to Hawaii in 2021. And so that's, resilient is another word that's often used to describe Detroit and Detroiters. And that is also problematic,
Mm,
because no, fix the problems,
yeah.
We're not going to just be resilient forever, especially when it comes to Detroit is primarily a black city. It's still primarily a black city, although it's really it's changing. The demographics are changing due to gentrification. But yeah, it's offensive, just to keep saying that Detroiters are resilient.
Mm.
And so anyway,
It's true, and I think there is a certain aspect of how the concept of samud is used and like applied. And I definitely hear this about like, oh, the Palestinians and like talking about where it's like there's a kind of almost deflection of
yeah.
like they can handle it because they have this system, therefore I don't need to do more. And to me, there's a kind of deep, deep bitterness that I experience as an Arab of like the betrayals, the hypocrisies, the silence. Um, I mean, even just small things like there is not a major boycott movement in like the Arab world. Like like in Lebanon, Nescafe, Nestle products, Coke, McDonald's, Starbucks, it's all there. Like there are people that advocate against it, but it's like, and again, it's not just like the bougie whatever. Like you'd have a store that literally has a picture of Khomeini and is selling only Nestle water,
Oh,
um, which I find very funny. But I think we're going a bit deep in a certain direction there. Um,
yeah.
I want to circle back or like slow down a little bit. There's one thing that I remember you talked about and you brought up. I forgot in what context, but it's around the concept of death,
Uh-huh.
that I found just deeply fascinating. Listeners
Uh-huh.
will know I have a complex about death. I think most of us actually do, but for the most part, we don't reckon with it.
Yeah.
Um, but you said something that I found just incredibly powerful, and I'm still thinking about it, which is that um, you were talking about your experience living on a farm,
Mhm.
and that death is a part of it, that you experience death on a daily basis. And
Mm.
one thing in specific, um, which is that when you pluck a fruit from a tree, you're doing that tree a favor.
Yeah.
And that when you eat into a ripe piece of fruit, the sweetness you taste is the taste of death. It
Right.
is the fruit kind of decaying a little bit and breaking down and therefore becoming sweet, which I found in a weird way. I don't know how to tie it together to like all the stuff that we usually talk about with Palestine and with imperialism and colonialism and patriarchy and capitalism, but it's like there's something like deeply spiritual and a kind of connection of like because all these are very like death driving forces.
Mhm. Yeah, I wonder if that has something to do with the way martyrdom is framed.
Mm,
That it's not just this um, pointless destruction, but that it's moving towards something larger. And I'm so glad you remembered that, Eamon, because I think about that all the time. Right now, we have a mango tree. It's this beautiful, old, gorgeous, majestic mango tree, and it hasn't fruited in years. And this year it's fruiting. And then just this morning, I was outside by the compost, and a big, beautiful, I should have brought it down. This big, beautiful pinkish orange mango had dropped, and actually the ants had started to the bugs got to it before me, but I still brought it into the house and I washed it out, and I'm gonna let it ripen. But yeah, uh, lately I've been making a lot of lei, the Hawaiian flower garland. You can make lei out of anything, but
mm,
we often associate them with flowers. But it's been really profound because you really look at plants, you relate to plants, you develop an intimacy with plants in a different way than when you're just like seeing them as food or as shade or and and when you look at flowers, and the flowering trees, there's so much extravagance. so much abundance, so much what we would consider waste, because like 90%, if not more, of the flowers just die. They just they don't feed anyone.
Mm.
They bloom, they're beautiful, they smell wonderful, and then they within, depending on the flower, sometimes that same day they fall
Yeah.
off and they die, you know? And and the tree is like still like it's cool with the tree. Like it's not a problem for the tree to like produce these thousands, hundreds or thousands of blossoms, and then they just die, because it's just like the life cycle of the tree. And then with fruit too. I mean, maybe not so much with like a mango tree, but with like, you know, when I was living in Detroit, the
Mm.
mulberries, just like the sidewalk would be covered with berries, you know? The streets would be covered with berries. Your shoes would just be covered by the time you got home, you know? Bicycle tires, everything. And and so just like that extravagance, I think is something that I want to embody, that I
Mm.
want to, like I feel capitalism is based on scarcity
Mm.
and it's based on competition. And so how can I be like the plumeria tree or the mulberry tree that is just like absolutely extravagant and, letting it all loose,
Yeah.
letting it all hang out. And um and knowing that there's a larger picture,
Mm.
I think that is what inspires me the most, is like this long vision, um, of, here is something, here is matter, whether it's a fruit or flower or something, and then it just becomes the next thing. It just becomes the next thing. It becomes fuel or food for something, whether it's uh, earthworms, snails, slugs, beetles,
Yeah.
microorganisms. It just becomes the next thing. And I recently moved to this new place, out in the country. And the first thing I did was start a compost because they didn't have a compost yet. And so I feel like that compost is actually like, um, it's bringing me into closer relationship with the mango tree because it's right under the mango tree.
Oh, nice. Okay.
But anyway, yeah, I just definitely feel like if we don't if we don't accept that level of, I mean, the human term we would call it waste or
Mm.
compost or something. It's definitely death, because when the flower falls, when the fruit falls, it's going to die.
Mm.
It means it's ready to go,
It's
when
already dead. Yeah.
ready, yeah. And so we could bring it into the house, let it ripen, and then, yeah, and that sweetness. I was thinking about fermentation, because I'm a champion fermenter. My friend calls me the fermentation sensation. I make kimchi, everything, kombucha, everything. And so the microorganisms and the decay is what brings out the flavor, you
Mm.
know. So fermentation is really like, I feel like it's grief practice in a way. It's death practice in a way,
Interesting. Yeah.
because we're tasting what happens as the food
Mm.
decomposes. We're tasting decomposition.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, I think about this stuff all the time, and I definitely feel like it doesn't make the grief easier, when it comes to like genocide,
No,
because
no.
that is absolute violence before its time.
Yeah. No, it's
But
very hard to prescribe meaning um, to what's happening, and even though it feels like incredibly necessary,
yeah,
um, to think positively about some of these things. Or, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, there's very little. silver linings.
No.
Um, but so to me, like with my whole thing of death, I've noticed, and I noticed after some of our conversations, and I think after that one in specific, that I think I had my very first positive conception of death.
Mm,
Like up until that point, it's all I don't want to die. I don't want people around me to die. I just don't want it to happen.
mm.
Um, but I think the first time I had like a positive, and not positive as in good, but as in affirmative,
Do you
was
mind if I ask you, have you had like loved ones, have you had people close to you die?
honestly, I've been very lucky with that. In that, not really. My
Mm,
grandfather passed away when I was about 12, and I think that's the closest person. And um, but there have been people like older relatives who have passed, but no one that's like I have like a daily communication with that this just is no longer there. And so there is like a lack of experience in that way.
uh,
Um, but so for me and myself, the
mm,
very first time I had this like positive idea was when I realized I want to die in Lebanon, and especially now that I've left and I'm living abroad for like the last few years, that was the very first time that I had this idea of not I don't want to die, but how I want to die.
mm.
I was also having this conversation with a person named Yafa, Yafa's Utopia. You might know them on Instagram. They're trans Palestinian. They do a lot of writing. They're a poet. They also do a lot of fundraising. Um, but they're also a death worker. They never fully explained what that entails, but it's clear from the things that they're focused on. And so, one thing that they brought up is like how strategic they are about everything in terms of the community. And they said, and I found this incredibly powerful, they said even when they die, they're going to make sure that their death is strategic, that their
Mhm.
death in some way contributes to the movement, contributes to the community, to trans people, like this, like trans struggles, Palestinian struggle for liberation. And it's that kind of thing that here we're speaking about, like not a specific political circumstance, but kind of the human condition, but mixed in with all of this stuff. We are faced with very violent, brutal systems that are very aligned or like informed. I don't like using the term because it makes it sound very academic, but necropolitics. Like
Mhm.
their operation is an operation of death and controlling death, and especially the Zionist entity, it's all about death. You know what I mean? Like one of the biggest slogans at the moment with Zionists is "Death to Arabs," but like
Oh,
it's official policy to like hold prisoners as bodies. Um, and so, but regardless of that specific thing, it's like then you have uh, a lot of Palestinians talking about "we teach life," and it's very true. But I think in that same way that when we're talking about life and death are very intimately tied, well, that's why I think thinking about death seriously in that way, not only at like a very personal level, um, is sort of emancipating in a way. Because like a lot of my fears, even about political engagement, when I really analyze it, it's a fear of death. It's a fear
hmm.
of suffering and death.
Yeah.
Um, but so when we talk about like Palestinians and native peoples and indigenous peoples' attachment to the land, there is also the attachment to an understanding and connection with death.
Mhm.
Um, and that
That's
the yeah
yeah, that's really beautiful. And if we really embrace our beingness, then we realize that we are the land, that our bodies are part of the land, that we are of the earth, and that our bodies are of the earth, and that we belong to the land. And that is definitely something that living in Hawaii, that is such a way of life, you know. I love that recognition of wanting to be buried in Lebanon, or I don't know, you didn't say buried, but
not
you
buried
said
to die, yeah,
yeah, die
yeah.
in Lebanon. And what I hear in that is just like this really um belonging to the land, belonging to the land, belonging to a place, and deep honoring of your body, you
Mm.
know. So it's not just like this conceptual dreaming of Lebanon as you die, but really being in Lebanon. I love that. And I think that is really that's very powerful. And I love what you said about Yafa too. Um, and yeah, I think about death all the time. I'm a Scorpio. I think about death. I go to like the topic of death all the time. And I've kind of become like a de facto death worker. I don't like use that title, and I don't have a business card or anything, but um, I have been present with friends who are going through the dying process, and I have been, part of care teams, support teams, and I have been with people who are dying. I was initiated, I would say, into death work I lost my brother when he was 25 years old. He was really, really young,
Holy
and
cow.
that was really, that was of course devastating. But in a way, it brought me into an intimacy with death that I wouldn't have had. And I lost both my parents when I was in my 30s. So I was
Wow.
very young.
Yeah.
Now I look at my children and they're like the age that I was when I lost my parents. And I plan to stick around for a good long time, but you never know. But so I feel like I've been around death quite a lot, and I've chosen to be around death quite a lot. And so yeah, I often think about like, I would like to return my body to the earth. Uh, Being cremated, it's a big carbon load.
Mm.
And so I would like to be returned to the earth in a sack, in a burlap sack. My grandchildren will have to like find a burlap sack, dig a deep hole, and then, and just I would, to return to the earth that has given me life for all these years, and then plant a tree. Um, and then a farmer that I know, when I was telling him my plans, he said, "Oh, you can plant an ulu tree. This is breadfruit, which is like a
Mm.
really um, uh, important plant in Hawaii because it's so nutritious and it's so versatile." And he said, in 75 years, the ulu tree will be big enough to cut down and carve into a canoe, and then they can sail to Korea in the canoe.
Wow.
And I just love that concept because once again, it's like the land and where we belong, where we came from,
Mm.
our own indigeneity, and connecting with and honoring that our own indigeneity. Um, so
No, that's incredibly powerful, honestly, and I think it does connect. You said at the beginning that what's happening in Palestine is so far away, but obviously for many reasons it is very close. But
yeah,
especially for you in Turtle Island, and like particularly in Hawaii, it's like the same settler colonialism um, that is sort of like has completely altered the landscape, but also just the way of life and the population and just so many things. It's like very difficult to quantify the effects of colonialism.
absolutely. I think what Palestine has opened up for me, especially since I moved back to Hawaii in 2021, is the recognition that what's happening in Palestine, what has been happening in Palestine is exactly the same as what happened here in Hawaii, the illegal overthrow, the forced annexation, statehood, which was supposedly, democratically decided, but not really. And then the onslaught of capitalism and the stealing of land left and right. I live on stolen crown land right
Mm.
now. It's deeply, deeply troubling, and it's something I feel like I need to constantly like exercise in my daily life. But what Palestine opened up for me, and I think for a lot of people, is that recognition of coloniality in every aspect of our lives. But what I didn't expect was that as as I was um, advocating for Palestine, that I would become much more connected to the Native Hawaiian community here, which reconnects me with my Korean heritage.
Mm.
So it's kind of like this three-way thing where I've kind of coming full circle back to my own indigeneity, my own native roots. Um, because, having I left Korea when I was 4, so I've lost access to my mother tongue. I've lost fluency. I won't say I've lost access completely, but I've lost fluency with my mother tongue, and and I uh, and I don't have any claim to like Korean citizenship or anything like that any longer. And like I said, my parents um, passed in the 1990s and early 2000s, but but really being being witness and being an advocate for Palestinians has brought me back around to my awareness of my Korean roots. In Korea there was the recent impeachment,
Mm.
the president who declared military dictatorship,
Yeah.
and then and millions of people, literally millions of people, came out to protest and to kick him out. And then recently, just the other day, there was the election of a centrist left president. But seeing what was happening in Korea, really gave me some fuel and energy and inspiration for what could happen here regarding Trump. Now, it's not going to happen. To tell you the truth, in the United States, it's not going to we're not going to overthrow Trump. We just don't have the political will because of the internalized colonialism.
Mm.
That's really what it is. You know, people are too stuck. People are too addicted. People aren't going to give up their comforts. People aren't going to give up their jobs. People aren't going to give up their capital, their
The only
retirement.
thing I guess is that it gets to a point where there's not much to give up,
Yeah,
as in when people are losing so much. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, that's neither here nor there. I don't know. I
I mean
actually,
that
yeah.
I've done that. That has been my personal decision. Whether it's smart or not. I've given up. My when I left my marriage. When I left my marriage in 2010, I gave up all my assets. I gave up. Retirement. I gave up health care. I gave up. We had 2 houses. I gave them up, and so so for me, that's been like very liberating. But I know that that is not necessarily the path for everyone.
No.
Um,
I think to me there's some sort of like political imaginary around this that I find sometimes a bit myopic. That like people even in his second term were saying maybe Trump would be good because it would kick people in the ass, they'd feel a flame until they would rise up to overthrow the government. I'm like, that's not how any of this works. That's
no,
like that's like I've never watched Hunger Games, but it kind of feels like a kind of American TV fantasy of like everyone wakes up and then they go and overthrow or whatever.
yeah. And to tell you the truth, here in Hawaii, there have been protests like, 2, 3 protests a week. And for a while, I was attending and bringing my drum and supporting. But to tell you the truth, I haven't been going
Hmm.
because unless we're going to escalate, it's just we're just venting,
Yeah.
you know? And I just
That's
feel like it's
it's been
so,
something I've been thinking about a lot, where it's like the problematic nature of venting, because
yeah,
maybe that energy could be, if it's not vented, maybe it could
yeah,
be channeled somewhere else.
yeah.
And so I've been thinking a lot about that over years now.
Yeah, so actually in the last month or so, I've I've pivoted back to mutual aid.
Mm,
We always go back to mutual aid.
yeah.
And so what I've been doing is I was running the boycott, divest, sanction movement here in Hawaii. I wasn't running it, but I was organizing it, and I stepped back because, I just felt like I don't want to keep saying, no, don't do this, no, don't do that.
Mm,
It's just like a really, it's not it doesn't feed your soul to
mm,
just keep saying, no, no, no. You have to
yeah.
say yes to something. And so I, so I started making lei, which sounds like nothing. I mean, it just sounds like making, weaving flowers together. But I started making lei, and it turns out I have kind of a knack for it. My mother was like really good with her hands,
Mm,
and I've always been like a maker. And then people started asking, "Oh, are you going to sell them?" And I said, "No, no, I'm not going to sell them. I don't. I am doing it for my own to feed myself,
yeah.
my soul, my inner artist, my inner creator. But I'm not doing it for profit. And plus, I'm not Native Hawaiian. I don't want to be like trying to profit off of
Oh,
the land."
yeah.
But then, if you don't mind, I'll tell you this little story. I was driving across the island. When you drive across the island, I live in Oahu. You have to go through the mountain range, the Ko'olau Mountains. They're very big, severe, just really jagged mountains, big barrier. And like whenever I'm crossing the mountains, it feels very taboo, in fact, the construction of the highway was extremely controversial because
Mm,
it was desecrating all these heiau, these sacred temples and sacred land. And so it was really controversial. And the military just like shoved this bill through to build the highway. And the fact of the matter is, I have to drive on the highway. That's
yeah.
just like life. So I have to drive across the highway. But every time I do, I really try to like, you know, I turn off the radio, I turn off the podcasts. I just try to like be quiet and be in a prayerful state. I talk to the mountains, I ask them for protection, I ask them for permission. I just like try to be respectful and prayerful. And one day as I was driving home through the mountains, the message it kind of popped into my head. Lei Po'o for Palestine. So what we did is we formed a little group. We make lei together, and people buy them at a sliding scale, and all the money is going toward it's called the Vainau Aloha Water Project.
Hmm.
And we have a family here in Honolulu who has a family in Gaza, and they are, so we're giving money every month to them, and they are doing water and food aid in
Oh, that's
Gaza.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just feel like whatever little we can do that's positive and um, not just protesting,
Mm,
I just feel like I like we need to do things that make a difference,
yeah.
however small, and and we never know like what the impact is going to be. Like, um, if we think about even in the past year, like if we compare like what was happening with the encampments last May to the consciousness now. I mean, even that it's not enough. But people who weren't talking about Palestine last year or the year before it's now at least part of more and more conversations.
Yeah.
At least the awareness is there, and at least there's um, uh, the global march to Gaza is happening
The
next week,
flotilla is sailing now.
flotillas, and so anyway, that's kind of like how I've pivoted my activism lately, and I just feel like that's been that's been really necessary for me.
That's great. That's really good
And
to
I
hear.
look at your work, Eman, I feel like the video essays are, like a way that you are really creating, that you are making something new. And I feel like that creating, that's the flip side of destroying. And that if we can keep creating, um, that is a way to um, just survive, to
Yeah.
cope. It's a way of coping with the violence and destruction that we see all around us.
I've been, I've got so many things, like reflections on that. I think on that last point, one thing that I've been trying to think about is the difference between coping and reckoning. Um,
Ah,
and I'm not sure how deep I can go with that, but there's a kind of, um, because I think coping has a certain aspect of like accepting.
yeah,
I don't know, and I think reckoning does too, but there is a kind of accepting it but resisting it at the same time.
yeah.
There's a sort of some things about coping. Again, this is my whole thing that I've been thinking a lot about with psychology and CBT, and part of the reason why I'm no longer in therapy, even though there are other reasons for that. My last therapist, who I loved, left me. She was a psychoanalyst though, so she's like one of the good ones. I do have a hierarchy of like psychoanalysis and then CBT and whatever. Um, but regardless, aside from that, there's something that my mother and a lot of the reasons that I just really appreciated and appreciate you and appreciate a lot of the things that, when we would talk a lot during the Palestine film clubs that you would bring into the space. Part of the reason, and this is super personal, why they were like so powerful for me, was because like in many ways you remind me of my mother. My mother for 10 years ran I wouldn't call it a yoga center, but it's like a center for many different sort of holistic healing practices. Um, and growing up, I was a bit of a new atheist, and I rejected it so entirely. And I was like, that's dumb. That's not how science works. Like, it's all down to a scientific whatever. And I think as I've been getting older, I've been understanding her a lot more. And understanding that a lot of the things that she does and she thinks about comes from that experience as someone who grew up for 15 years, civil war, in Lebanon, and then and raised children afterwards. And I don't know, there's just a lot of things that then leads her to the point of like believing that everything has a reason, everything happens for a reason. And so for me, again, I'd reject it so much, but lately, and especially in the last few years, I really start to understand a lot of it. And a part of it was, and I feel like both of us have met in the middle in a lot of ways, and we have a beautiful relationship that I cherish so much. And so a part of it is I'm no longer dismissive in any way with her things, the opposite. But I also kind of, you know, like for instance, I don't believe, and I can't fully believe in a kind of everything happens for a reason at a kind of universal level, but rather that we have to make the meaning ourselves, that everything has a reason because we have to make it a reason, Otherwise, we will just go like completely insane. Um, but so one thing that she's been telling me a lot is that, she comes up with these phrases and she repeats them. And the latest one is that, and it's like one of these things that she's read on Instagram, um, but that she reads really deep into. And then when she brings it, I'm like, that is actually quite good. Which is the latest one is the opposite of depression is not joy, but is like either creativity or expression. And I definitely find that to be true when I am at my lowest ebbs. I'm just stagnant. I experience literally like crippling anxiety and depression where I just go static and I can't do, I don't speak, I don't want to do anything. And so there is the constantly nourishing thing of the act of doing, of creating, of being expressive, in some shape or form, which I do in this podcast, I do in my video essays. Um, And that to me is like nourishing, and that is the stuff of life to me. Again, connecting to like sort of the beginnings of this conversation. Um, yeah, that's a lot of the part of like sort of like nourishing life. Um, and sort of it's very implicit, but with every word we say, with every attempt we have, even if it's in saying no, even just the attempt to me is like constantly vitalizing because it affirms that we do believe there's hope, that we believe that these actions have some meaning, that we are potent, we are able to do something. Um, Otherwise, we would just all be in despair and not even try. I don't know if any of that makes too much sense.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I don't know if you can hear the background noise. It's a weed whacker.
Oh,
It's like the din of, living in the country. But
for a second I thought it was a drone, but it's
I
that's
know it sounds like drones and it
yeah.
reminds me of drones, but yeah, it's just a weed whacker. Um, but anyway, yeah, I love that, Ayman, and I can completely connect with that. And it is, we don't want to be positive, toxically positive,
Mm,
and I'm thinking about, the what you said about what's the word that you used? Reckoning.
mm,
I love that. And so I when I think of the word reckoning, I think of like balancing.
mm,
Um, and so, on a as a yoga practitioner, balancing the energy. So, from a yoga perspective, there's rajas, which is like active and fiery movement. Tama, tamas, which is like static and like boulders and very calm. And then sattva, which is sort of like um, clear, light, translucent, sort of like a in between. And so if I can move the energy from and from tamas into sattva, if I can move the energy from rajas into sattva, then I can be more present. I can be more. Um, I don't want to, make it too utilitarian, because I feel like then that's reinforcing that efficiency colonial model. But I can be more present. I can be more effective. I can be more relevant,
mm,
to my community, to the people around me. Um, and so whatever we can do for ourselves, then we bring that into, then I'm in relationship with my grandchildren, my children, my students, my neighbors. And that completely affects, when I even like when I walk into the corner store and I'm buying milk, whatever energy I bring to that transaction, it's gonna have an impact. So
mm,
these little things, but I definitely feel like, um, I'll just tell you one little thing that sounds like nothing, but it actually is something, which is here in my neighborhood, to get onto the main road, there's only one main road. To get onto the main road at certain hours, someone has to let you in, you know, and because there's too many cars.
mm,
Tourists and it's this area, there's a lot of tourist traffic on the weekends, and so the local people know to slow down and wave you in.
mm,
The settlers and tourists never do that. They don't know. They just ignore you. They don't even notice you. They just drive right past you. But the local folks, they see you at the corner, they see that you're waiting, and they'll wave you in, and then give a little shaka, they give a little shaka back, and you get like this little endorphin boost.
yeah.
Oh, you're literally your hormones. It affects your hormones, And so uh, even just like seeing each other on Zoom, it's giving like a little bit endorphin boost,
Mm,
versus like um, talking on the phone, or that can too, but just that little bit of visual stimulation. And so yeah, I just feel like whatever we can do to help each other stay afloat
Yeah.
and not drown. um yeah, I want to just mention one of my inspirations lately.
Oh,
Her
please.
name is Norma Wong. Norma
Hmm.
Wong Roshi. She's a Zen teacher, and she's Chinese Hawaiian, Hakka Chinese and Hawaiian. And she just released a book which um, I need to get a hold of, called When No Thing Works. And it's a Zen and indigenous perspective on the state of the world. Um, and but what she says is, we're looking at 4,000 years of human history that have led us to the state of collapse.
Hmm.
Why would we think that we can change that in a few election cycles?
Hmm.
Like, and Trump is not really the problem. It's everything that led up to Trump
Hmm.
that we were all part of,
Yeah.
that we all contributed to. And so in the US, it's very funny to kind of watch the white liberals go bonkers right now because they think it's all about, they think that we've suddenly become a fascist nation.
Yeah.
No, we've been building up to this for years, for
Yeah.
decades, and for centuries, if you look at, like our whole history.
My favorite example of this, actually, just to jump it very quickly, is I'm on Blue Sky these days, and it's an
Yeah.
incredibly white space, an incredibly
Oh,
American space. And
yeah.
so whenever I go on like the Discover section, so not like the people I follow, it's just
Yeah.
a bunch of white American liberals who
Yeah.
it's just all about Trump. And but then do a kind of very American patriotism, or then be like talk about Kamala Harris and be like, "Oh, I wish she was our president." It's like, can you not see that she and her Biden, I mean, the so much about the Democrats, and then now what the Democrats are doing, this is part of the problem that led to this. But the very
Yeah.
specific example is that I saw a kind of a meme or a picture of George Orwell. Like it was a picture of two faces. George Orwell being like, "See, I told you so," and then it's who's this white American settler woman who wrote *Handmaid's Tale*. Uh,
Margaret Atwood.
Margaret Atwood, and then and her being like, "No, no, no, I told you so." So what I did is I quote tweeted this, and I put a picture of Octavia Butler, and I wrote something of like, "Sit your white asses down," like just because you read, and this is written in the '80s, and she's not a prophet. She's not just like it's so random how she was able to. This is like study and research and an awareness of
Yeah.
the trends based on like a real understanding of what the United States is. And so like
Exactly.
when she has in her book from the '80s, in the parable of the sower, she has a president who talks about America first. That's
Exactly.
not like who is this foreseer? It's like no, the kind of X country first is like a thing. And like
Right.
I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, she said that in an interview. She said, what I do is I recognize patterns
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then just extrapolate from those patterns that I'm seeing. And so yeah, she was right on. Um, and any of us can do that. And what Norma Wong tells us is that, so what we need to do now is to start telling a new story, a different story. I won't say a new story because we might not, because it, the coloniality and patriarchy, it's just really a sliver of humanity.
Mm.
There was, we had human history for tens of thousands of
Yeah.
years before we started invading each other, stealing each other's lands, and enslaving each other, and all of that. And so, but we need to tell the story that we want to live, and so we're creating a new pattern. So I feel like even though I'm making lei, and we raised $500 in the first 3 weeks,
That's
you
great.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I just feel like whatever we can do, we're creating a new pattern, and that I don't want to get like too much into like quantum physics and stuff, but yeah, that like um, we're making waves,
Mm.
however modest, and
I think there's a metaphor, and again, it connects to something I'm sure you'll love and I'm sure you've talked about before or think about a lot, which is mycelium, which is
yes,
fungus. And this is a
yes,
metaphor that we use a lot and employ like in the From the Periphery Media Collective, that, you know, the way that mushrooms work, mushrooms as we know it are just the fruiting bodies. Those aren't the mushrooms, right? Those are just the things that pop out. And so, in a similar way, when we see something like a revolution, an uprising, this isn't something that just comes out of nowhere. There is like an underground network that has been
yeah,
forming for God knows how long. Um, that is composed of both like organic and non-organic material. It's been building and communicating with itself, that there is actual communication within mycelium. And so what you have is that this unpredictable rising up, but that the groundwork is there, and that oftentimes mutual aid or like what we consider small projects, contribute to that, to like you're describing the waves that turn into the tsunami, or the mycelium that turn into the fruiting body. And I find that quite powerful,
yeah.
in the kind of ways in which history moves that we really could not predict.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. I love that. And one another thing that I wanted to add, Iman, as you were talking about psychotherapy, and I've been in and out of therapy over the years, and for me, it's never really clicked. I just don't feel like it's like the format for me. I've never really found a therapist that I wanted to stay with long term, and but anyway. And I think the reason is, I think I have the language for why it doesn't work for me, and that is that um, collective trauma needs collective healing. That for me to work and just talk about my individual stuff, it wasn't fulfilling me. It wasn't moving me the way the energy needed to be moved, and I needed really more people. I needed a group, and so I think that's why collective like from the periphery and our organizing spaces have that potential. Our movement spaces have that potential. Um, I feel like often our moving spaces don't uh, name or prioritize healing.
Yeah,
When they don't,
100%.
then we just kind of like reinforce our traumas. And that can be frustrating. That can be really difficult.
Yep. And often leads to the premature end of some of the. I found
Exactly.
this is something that me and Isra,
Yeah.
the co-host of the Mutual Aid podcast, we
Yeah.
talk about a lot, and this is a lot of their focus, which is the interpersonal work that gets neglected because, we're here to do serious politics and we're here to overthrow this, and like, we're not a group therapy session, but it's like it's gonna happen. And I
It's
have
gonna
seen,
happen.
yeah, like I
Yeah.
know I like knock on wood all the time because I'm part of a mutual aid group in Lebanon called Queer Mutual Aid. We've been running for 5 years, and like just being Lebanese is enough trauma. But we're all queer, and that's like so many more layers of trauma on top of all of it. But so we've been going, to me, one of the biggest achievements is that we're still going after 5 years. We're growing.
Yeah.
And a part of it, I think, is because we hold so much space for each other,
Yeah.
um, that we center each other, sometimes over the work, mostly over the work, like because we are part of this community. So there's not this hierarchy, um, that like, and obviously the work is important and we never let it stop, but it's like when there's clearly a problem that's stemming from someone's trauma or like an interpersonal issue, we make space for it because
Yeah.
otherwise those things simmer.
Yeah.
And I have personally seen a lot of groups fall that it it comes out as tactical or ideological differences, but it's really just you felt hurt and there wasn't
Right.
a space to talk about it and no one was willing to acknowledge it. And
Yes.
so it feels petty, but it's human as fuck and it's like the real thing. And that's something that I constantly talk about and I've talked about several times on the podcast, which is like focus on the people in the collective, in the like movements you're part of.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that we need more opportunities to, yeah, like watch films together or read books together or make late together or
mm,
go swimming together. Like just like we need more spaces to just nurture each other in order to keep going.
yeah.
uh, and to give opportunities for that kind of healing within our collectives.
hmm Because that is part of the work. Um,
It-
but it's also like a necessary aspect of organizing together. Um, okay. I think that's a very good place to sort of wrap up. Is there
yeah.
anything else you want to add before we do?
I can't think of anything right now, so I think, yeah, we'll just let it let it rest
Let
there.
it hang.
Yeah, let it hang.
There is obviously a lot that I would have, and maybe we'll just do another one of these. For instance, I mean, I really did actually want to ask because we have this opportunity. I remember you talked in the watch parties about attending Columbia in the 80s
Oh yeah.
and seeing Columbia now. I wanted to get your perspective on it, but I feel like that's a very different conversation. So maybe that can be a basis for the next one, or like
Sure.
kind of giving more of a historical, like a, lived experience kind of perspective of some of these spaces that are very, kind of centered at the moment,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
in a
Yeah,
very different way.
sure.
But okay, Peggy, thank you
Okay,
so,
thank you.
so much.
Yeah,
I
thanks
really
for
love
inviting
this.
me. Yeah, I did too. Okay. I
Uh,
hope you do as well. Oh, I guess it's evening. Have a
it's
wonderful
evening.
evening.
Before we wrap up, I have to do this. Thank you everyone for listening to this episode. If you appreciated it, if you like this episode, there are two ways, major ways that you can support this podcast. You can become a member of our Patreon, links below. $5 a month, you get access to this podcast, other podcasts. They're open anyway, but you also get access to like the monthly hangout, where it's like cool people getting around and talking about stuff. The other way is you can give a one-time donation in my tip jar, which goes straight into my pocket. And if you don't want to support financially, or if you can't support financially, leave a review, a rating, like this podcast, and to help us with the internet algorithm, or you can help us with the organic algorithm of society. Tell your friends and tell your family. So that's it from me. Thank you so much, Peggy, and thank you all for listening.